Hey folks, hello. Today we're going to be working on a black Nintendo Wii that I recently got. It was bought working, but there are some issues with the power button and the eject button. Basically, they were kind of hard to push, and while they worked sometimes, they didn't work all the time. So I'm going to use that as an excuse to open this thing up, clean it out, do a full restoration of it. Well, almost full, you'll see what I mean in a bit, and then put it back together. Now for just fixing the buttons, I don't need to do this whole process, but I figured I might as well give you the full show. So for now, let's start with our simplest tools, our Phillips head screwdriver, our tri-wing screwdriver, and then a small paper cutter. Starting with these little plastic things off the top, I mean, 70% of the Wiis I get are missing at least one or both of them, so it's not super rare to see them missing. Now with the Wiis, they're actually a combination of these Phillips head and tri-wing screws on the outside. For those who don't know, those tri-wing screws are not a proprietary Nintendo thing, but they are extremely common on Nintendo products. Basically what they do is they prevent people who aren't qualified or don't go through the extra trouble to buy a specific screwdriver. They prevent them from taking apart their Wii and potentially damaging things. So, in my opinion, a pretty good idea. Now, taking this thing apart, not the hardest thing in the world. Obviously, I'm going to be taking this slow because there's a lot of small little pieces you need to take off before you can get to the screws. You'll notice that there's these plastic feet, or I should say rubber feet, all across them. And I just take my little black spudger here, and what it allows me to do is just pry them right off. Now, not all of these need to come off. I take them all off for completeness sake so that I can clean the entire Wii casing later on in this video. But for now, I'm going to take everything off. You'll also notice that there's these black stickers, which I'll be getting to later, which I can use my knife to slightly peel off without destroying so that I can replace them at the end and it will look as if it was never touched. So we're going to speed up a bit here, and let's get to the next. Alright, we're back, and here you can see me removing the final two stickers with my knife here. Again, being extremely careful not to damage these. They're not at any point required for your Wii in order for it to work. I mean, a lot of times people won't even notice them if they're gone, but they do cover up some brightly colored screws. So if you really want the Wii to look, well, new, or even properly used and not opened, it's good to try to save them and make sure that they don't get destroyed. We got two here, one and then the other two. Now with those, I go very, very slowly just to pick up the edge, and then I use my pair of tweezers in order to pull them off without destroying the sticker itself. And once we got those two off, there's only two screws remaining, and we'll get to the next spot of opening the thing up. Alright, all the screws on the casing are out. Let's get this thing open. Be very careful when opening this, because see that little cable right there? Yeah, that one right there. If you pull that out the wrong angle or too quickly, that will just snap right off. There's a tiny little, very, very fragile plastic connector in there, and the cable itself is super easy to destroy. Now, if this was just a normal repair and I wasn't doing this for the channel, I might not even open the rest of the system here. I might just work on that faceplate in order to remove any dust or issues with the buttons, and I just give the rest a good compressed air blowout. But you know what? We're going to take this all the way through, and we're going to do a full cleaning to show you what it's like to service a Wii from the inside out. So let's remove that shell. A little bit dusty inside. Not horrible, but still not the greatest. And you can see the inside. Obviously, you have that big piece of metal shielding covering most of the CPU as well as the disk drive. And you have the fan blades on the left there, right next to the heatsink, which has that plastic covering on it. So first things first, obviously, we got to remove that metal casing that is around, that metal shielding, I should say, that's around the disk drive and the motherboard to get below. Okay, and with the casing off and with the shielding off, we're now just about ready to work on the disk drive. Make sure to always remove the disk from this if possible, otherwise you might have the unfortunate ability of scratching your disk or getting a mechanical piece stuck. It happened to me on a PS3 once. It was horrible. Anyway, here, you couldn't see it from below, but I removed a ribbon cable and I also removed a small plastic connector. There are two connectors, one supplying power, the other supplying data, and by removing those, we are now able to remove the disk drive, which will be cleaned separately. Here, you can see those two connectors that I spoke about, as well as the two Wi-Fi antennas that are on each side of the Wii system. There's a small piece of tape that holds down the cabling for the Wi-Fi antennas, which is very small and kind of... It's a very, very annoying cable to work with because it is extremely fragile. But anyway, I'm removing this tape. I usually don't replace the tape unless I really want to, but in this case, we're just going to put it off to the side there. Now, after we deroute the antennas from the system, let's go and continue the disassembly. Now, one thing you're going to see me doing here is I'm removing all of these black plastic brackets, and across them there's this really thin metal. It almost feels like aluminum foil. Here you can see that when I was taking it out, I actually forgot to remove a screw in the middle, and then I'm like, oh wait, there you go. It's funny. It's whenever you film these videos, a lot of the times it's like when someone's watching you perform a task over your shoulder, you forget very obvious things that you would never forget if you were just doing it on your own. Like, try typing a text message or typing on a computer with someone watching over your shoulder. It's brutal. Anyway, but those thin pieces of metal that almost look like aluminum foil are EMF shielding. So those will all come off. They're extremely easy to bend and lose, so you have to be very careful. And at this point, we are left with just the final metal cover for the motherboard itself. Lots and lots of screws to be held down here, so let's get those removed and get down to the motherboard. Moment of truth here. We're gonna put the cables back through the metal casing and the motherboard shield, and off it comes. And below it we have the Wii motherboard. If anyone's looked at a PlayStation motherboard or something similar to that, you'll notice that there is significantly less cooling on this than you would see on one of those. Hence the old meme that a Wii is just two GameCubes taped together. Some accuracy to that, but there's no thermal paste or anything crazy like that. You just have some thermal pads and one single heat sink there hooked up to a super tiny fan. None of that craziness like you'd see inside a PS3 or an Xbox. So here I'm removing the Wi-Fi and Bluetooth modules, going through and removing the screws for the heatsink itself, which is going to come off super easy because, well, there's no thermal paste to crack off. It just has a small thermal pad stuck on top of the CPU. So let's go through and take that thing off. All right, and with that off, we now have the motherboard fully exposed and it can be removed from the Wii system. Surprisingly small, but I guess that's how it works with these kind of systems. It's not the most powerful system as we know, and we are able to take off the final plastic shell from the bottom, remove the final bit of metal covering, and at this point, our Wii is fully disassembled and ready to be cleaned and restored. Let's move on to the next step. But wait, before we do that, we have a word from our sponsors. And today's sponsor is us. Let's go see. Totoro of the small indoor palm tree, I have traveled far to find you. Tell me, What is your wisdom?
Traveler, you should know that the purpose of life is to subscribe to Tech Transfigurations. No more shall you travel and wonder. Hitting like on this video is your first task as a follower. Now travel on, my child. There is much delicious food for us all to eat.
Well, I'll tell you what, that Totoro there seemed to have some pretty good advice, so I mean, if you want infinite wisdom, I'd say take him up on his offer. But anyway, back to the video here. With the Wii completely disassembled, I did a bit more disassembly off screen here. We are now ready to clean off the plastic parts. As we've gone through my other videos, plastic parts are very easy to clean. Or I should say the solutions for plastic parts are very easy to clean. You just have a bin of warm, soapy water. You have yourself a good toothbrush or other sort of brush for getting into those tiny little bits that you want to clean out. And you just get to scrubbing, just like you would any old dish. So here I'm starting with the plastic brackets that you take from all around the Wii. You remember those being taken off. And you can see that there's plenty of scrubbing action to be done. Now, if you want to watch the full one of these, we have our uncut channel. Check out the description. But I'm going to fast forward through most of this so you can see me go through and clean off the various pieces and get to the next step. And if you ever believed that I wasn't actually cleaning much off whenever I do these kind of cleanings, check this out. This is a photo I took right after I washed up the various Wii parts you just saw here. Look at that brown. That all just came off the system that we were washing. So yes, that is why I wear gloves, and that's why we wash those things. They get absolutely filthy, even if they might not look it on the surface. Food for thought. And just like we did with the soap and water in the last step, here we're now ready to clean off the motherboard itself. For this kind of thing, just like in my other videos, we're going to be using a 91% isopropyl alcohol solution. It's a way that we can wash off any dirt, dust, all that sort of fun stuff from a motherboard or other electronic components without actually damaging the components themselves. Obviously, you can't use water for various reasons, and shorts, dirt, all that fun stuff. Point being, though, 91% will evaporate very quickly after use, enabling us to use it safely and as much as we need. So there's your 91%, and let's get some of that poured and jump right into the cleaning. Alright, and you can see that as I use it, you can actually see the effect of it on that little bit of marker that was on the motherboard itself, probably from the manufacturing, because at least I was told this Wii was not open before. But we're able to scrub down and get off any dust and dirt that was left. And from that last cleaning step you saw with the soap and water, there was quite a bit in here, so this is probably going to be quite helpful. I also use the second black pad beneath my workstation whenever I do this kind of cleaning. You don't need to, but I'm just always paranoid because sometimes ink can carry, and I don't want to get ink onto my nicer workspaces. So just scrubbing. Those bristles of the toothbrush are light enough that they won't damage anything as long as they don't push too hard, but they're firm enough, but they'll get any kind of dirt, dust, and debris out. So I'll speed things up again, and we'll move right on forward after I polish up and all these little pieces and plugs. Alright, so we're going to take one last little bit of clean off here with a Q-tip. get the rest of that ink off there just because the ink carried during the first cleaning. And we'll take one swipe around the CPU as well, just in case there's any sort of debris that came off of that thermal pad that was on the heatsink. A quick swipe around the outside, clean off the last little of the ports, and we should be just about done here. Yep, let's give it 2 thumbs up and move on to the next. So this next one here, I actually did a partial video on separately for already, but this was the main video I was making when I did that separate video. For this, I don't know if you saw earlier, but we had a whole bunch of massive scratches on this Wii. And while I tend to sell or keep most of my Wii systems as used, not like new or new, so I always assume that there's going to be a little bit of damage physically to them. This one had some pretty massive stuff that I wasn't comfortable with. So if you want the full experience of me cleaning up some of these scratches, go check out the other video. I'll link that in the description. But for now, what I'm doing is TLDR, applying something called a Novus solution. It's basically a plastic polish where the higher the number means the harder the scratches is going to get out. And I'm applying it across the full shell of the system. I use a Novus 2 and a Novus 3 for this when I finish with the Novus 1 to get the worst of the scratches out. And yes, I know that when it comes out of this scratch polishing process, it's not going to look perfect. It's not supposed to look perfect. It's going to have a couple of scratches left and plenty of spider scratches that would resemble normal usage. But it's going to have those giant deep scratches that you saw at the beginning all taken care of. So anyway, it's going to speed this up and move right along. All right, and right here at the end, after I do most of the final polish, I'll obviously do a little bit more polishing off screen. You can see exactly what I meant. There are some small spidery scratches remaining, but you can even see just from that reflection that a lot of the big stuff is gone. And it just glistens and gleams. It's almost like a mirror at this point. I mean, look, you can see the ceiling of the room. You can see my recording stand. It's now polished to what I would say a proper used finish. And that's what the goal we are going for here. All right, and this party is almost done. We've taken the Wii apart. We've washed off the plastic pieces. We've cleaned the motherboard components. We've even done a bit of plastic repair. And with everything all cleaned up, it's time to put it back together. So let's go through and do the same exact steps we did before, but in reverse. One big change you're actually going to notice from before is my screw holder on the left there. What I do is with the Wii systems, because there's just so many screws going around, I actually have a nice pair of calipers. Basically what they do is let me measure the size and the type of the screw, and it allows me to make a very organized hold of all the different types of screws that I use during the disassembly. Then, as I put it back together, I have a written list of steps that call out the exact screw to be used. What this means is I don't lose screws, I don't put screws in the wrong spots, and I don't accidentally use the wrong screws on the wrong systems or drop them. It makes things much, much easier, and what I tell people is it basically turns this entire process into an adult Lego set. You have your pieces, you have your instructions, and you put them right back together, albeit with a much higher risk of electrocution than your normal Lego set, but you know what I mean. Anyway, I'm going to go through and reapply those ribbon cables, and you'll see me start screwing this thing back together. Let's fast forward as always and see this thing start to take shape. All right, gonna stop us really quick right here for one moment, because one thing you're gonna see, there is one thermal pad on the heatsink, there's one still on the chip on the motherboard. I don't have to reapply any kind of thermal paste like I would if I was doing a PS3 or PS4 repair, or even apply new thermal pads. I have replacement thermal pads in my supply, but these ones were in good enough shape that I didn't feel that they needed it. The one on the Wi-Fi chip didn't look great, but a little bit of molding by hand was able to make it work fine. So honestly, if it means I don't have to bust open new parts or use non-OEM parts, I'm happy to keep what's already there, especially if they're in good condition. So let's keep going. All right, with the fan back, we are now on to my least favorite part of putting this thing together, and that is reattaching the disk drive. Because we got those two little cables there, and because of the angles of this, it's really, really hard to get it back together without destroying or damaging one of the cables. So I start with the ribbon cable first, because it has a little plastic clasp on it that makes it easy to lock down. You fit it in there, you snap down the clasp, bam, you're done. Now, to get the second cable in there is a bit tougher, because it has almost a weird spin to it, so you have to almost turn it upside down in order to get it in there. And because I don't want to break the ribbon cable, I gotta hold it almost invisible. So here I kind of like doing like a Circus Soleil contortionist act of trying to get my hands and fingers beneath this drive in order to get it in there. My first try fails because I'm trying to hold it so that you can see it on the camera, and my second try I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna just kind of do this however way it works. I get it in there, push it in, get my nails in there, and bam, snapped right in. And with that, we are able to get the disk drive back in. Of course, we're being very careful of those Wi-Fi cables. Those can very easily get caught and cut, so I need to loop it beneath the EMF shielding and pull it across. But in doing so, the hardest part of the Wii is back together, and we're ready to just about finish the rest of the reassembly. So let's get that back in there and get this thing back together. All right, and with these last few screws back together, we are just about done with the reassembly of the main Wii system itself. But there's one part we haven't touched on yet, and that's gonna be the front face of the Wii. That small piece of shell where the buttons were, which was the entire reason we took apart this thing to begin with. We gotta do that. So let's take a look at that one. Now, if you remember, these parts were cleaned in that soapy water solution, including the actual buttons themselves. So in doing so, I was able to dislodge quite a bit of dirt and dust from just about all of them. By the process of cleaning these, as well as the plastic shell casings and the motherboard components, I'm hoping that dislodged any dust or dirt that was causing those buttons to press correctly or causing any sort of stickiness or jamming. So let's do a quick reassembly of the front of this, and hopefully this problem is fixed once and for all. All right, so with those last couple of screws, we are all done. The system is back together. I don't reapply those stickers at this point. I do that off camera later. And I also do a tiny bit more cleanup of some of the dust that got back on the system during reassembly. But overall, it's all together. It fits. And let's test it. All right, so let's see if this guy turns on. We're all hooked up. TV's ready. It's a good sign so far. Let's sync up this controller. Okay, we're attached. And awesome, working. So let's have them try a disc here. Let's insert a disc. Let's just do this GameCube disc I picked up the other day while messing with the GameCube system. And let's see if the disc reader spins up. I don't believe this disc reader was broken, but this is something that breaks pretty quickly on a lot of these systems, so best to make sure. Good sign so far, let's make sure it works. And there we go. All right, well, thank you so much for watching today, folks. This is a really fun one. We'll have many more to come in the future. I actually got some Xbox Elite controllers I'm going to be fixing. I've got an old NES. I got an old Nintendo DS that's on the to-do list. So if you like it, stop by again, leave this a like, leave us a comment, and maybe even subscribe. We'd love to have you around. See you next time.